and welcome again to South Florida One. I am your 70s chick, and I am going to be discussing today major hot spots of the 1970s, the disco era preferred. And disco, of course, we all know broke big in the mid 70s, and it was a major breakthrough in music. But unfortunately, it petered out right around the beginning of the 80s. There was popularity as it had in the 70s. However, okay, let's begin. One of the major hot spots in South Florida was called Pete and Lenny's. And it was opened in 1973 by Pete Boyness and Lenny Boyer. And it was the place to be in the 70s, being that it had major performers, recording artists of the day, such as it had Donna Summer and Al Green, which were two of my absolute favorite artists. And on the lower end of the spectrum, I really wouldn't say lower, but weren't as well established, were Vicki Sue Robinson of Turn the Beat Around fame, and Tavares, who did More Than a Woman, and I think the Bee Gees were far superior to that. More Than a Woman, they did Heaven Must Be Missing an Angel, and one of my favorites called It Only Takes a Minute. And they also performing there was Odyssey, who had a one-hit wonder in 1977 called Native New Yorker. Really nice tune. And that reminds me, I remember I drew a picture in that era. I drew a picture of disco, like a disco with the lights and people on the dance floor and all the main tunes that were of that day. I had them written as it coming out of the speakers. One of them was Native New Yorker, I remember. And yeah, who knew I was quite the artist back then. Anyway, the featured DJs there were Barbara London and DJ Damien, who was there from 1983 till its dissolution in 1988. One of the major TV programs of the day was called Disco 77 that was filmed there. And it gave them a lot of exposure, massive exposure in over 70 countries. And it gave the club, massive exposure due to the fact, beside the fact that there were only 3 network channels and 1 public access channel back then in South Florida. And it gave them great visibility. It was, like I said, is one of the really, I looked it up, and I remember I was supposed to go there in 1983 around the prom. I was supposed to go there with this guy that mistakenly thought, just because I broke up with a boyfriend, that he could date me, and he wasn't my type. And then he tried putting his arms around me. I said, I've already got a boyfriend. He said, really? You do? So story of my life. Why does it seem like everybody that you have a crush on is like unavailable, and the ones that chase you are the ones who you don't think are unattractive necessarily, but just aren't your type, or you're not feeling them? Anyway, back to the subject matter. A lot of the house bands there, 2 of the house bands there were called The Real Thing and Ecstasy. And after a while, Pete Boyness decided to open a club called Christopher's in Fort Lauderdale in 1977. And the club and Pete and Lenny's dissolved in 1988. And speaking of Christopher's, my mom had a few really interesting experiences there in the 90s. She used to go there with friends, and she had quite a few colorful men asking her to dance. One of them asked her, and he'd go out and he was pulling his socks up. He had these really dorky socks, and he's pulling his socks up. And another one was dancing like he was like a bird taking a dump. He would do this with his hands under his legs. Boom, boom. And another one was like Ray of Rain Man. After he danced with her, he'd say, "Thank you, you've been very nice." And then she goes to sit, and again, "Thank you, you've been very nice." My mom says it's because a lot of these guys know they have nothing to lose. And I'm like, why do all these friggin' losers and dorks come up and ask us out? She says, because they have nothing to lose. I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't get it, but whatever. You figured it would be the ones who, are the most, charming and have the charm and all that would be asking you to dance. But I don't know. I guess sometimes it's not what not what it seems. Another major disco that opened up around 1977 was one called The Limelight. And of course, I used to hear commercials about this one too back then. And I was really enthralled, and I kept wondering, God, I want to go to a disco. But like I said, I was born in the wrong decade. I should have grown up in the 70s, at least be in my late teens, early 20s, because I'd be going at all these major clubs. I'd be doing it all the time. And anyway, it opened in Hallandale in 1977, and it quickly became a model for other competing nightclubs, as it featured $1 million sound and light show and a sunken stainless steel floor. And the club was always packed anytime the doors opened. And the DJ was named Bob Lombardi, and he was recruited from the Long Island disco scene, where he'd be a staple in Long Island clubs. And the clubs that he was a mainstay at were named the Corral and Rumble. What was it? Rum Bottoms. That was Rum Bottoms. And with his DJing, he used to use carts instead of records, and it led him to create the use of beats per minute, BPMs. And my friend Lee, who should be on here in the chat room pretty soon, would know all about that. He's incredibly tech savvy, and he's trying to teach me a few things, but he's really pushing me to get a sound system, a soundboard. I'm like, I can't afford that. I want to get, I'm in the mood. I want to get a bass guitar and learn bass. I've always wanted to. And that's my next purchase is going to be once I get my other unemployment check. I'm going to go ahead, and there's one on eBay it contains the amp and the bass guitar and the picks and all that. Although I'm not going to learn how to do the picks. I'm playing with fingers, and it's like $400, which is really a steal, and it's on eBay. But anyway, getting back to the matter at hand. Once he parted ways with Limelight, South Florida DJ turned mega music producer who worked with a South Florida Miami band called Expose, an all-female girl band. All-female girl band. Am I being redundant here? Anyway, named Expose, and I'm sure a lot of you know who Expose is. They had Point of No Return, Come Go With Me, which is one of my favorites, Let Me Be the One, and their number one, which was Seasons Change, which is a beautiful song, just beautiful. And me, I tend not to like a lot of late 80s music, popular tunes, but that was one of my favorite. And he performed under the name Louis Martinet, and he took over the turntable duties until the club was tragically destroyed in a fire in, I'm not too sure when, but it was destroyed in the fire after several years. And the DJ Bob Lombardi, who has passed on, will always be remembered as one of the innovators of DJing and mixing. And since then, the club has been reopened in Atlanta, and it's a shame because I would have liked to experiencing that. I guess even now, I mean, there are several clubs that I think one in Boca called Platforms, and they play 70s and 80s music, which I really want to go to, and I have to find somebody to go with. And I tend to be one that competes with other women, and I go out and I look great, and I see other women who look better than me, with the bigger boobs. And anyway, I'm sorry. That's probably too much information, but yeah, I'm just gonna have to say screw it and just go one of these nights, because I really wanted to experience those clubs and I haven't yet. But anyway. Moving on to the next big club that opened in 1969 in Sunrise Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. It was called Bachelors 3, and it seated about 300 people, and it was owned by 3 bachelors. One of them named Bobby Van, who was a singer, and of course the best quarterback at the New York Giants, everyone knows, Joe Namath, and one of his teammates named Ray Abruzzese, or however you pronounce it. So good Italian name there. And it was one of the first dating bars for singles, also known as Meet meat market, and pickup joint. And two of the major acts that performed there were Frankie Valli and Ray Charles. And a lot of other celebrities performed there. And after a while, due to the questionable clientele, being that due to a lot of wine, women, and song, along with movie stars, pop stars, and celebs, you can always expect the mafia to show up. Anyway, Pete Rozelle, who was the head commissioner of the NFL back then, he issued Namath an ultimatum asking him to divest his interest in the club or face suspension. And he warned Namath of the clause of contract which prohibited players from entering drinking or gaming establishments. And so in a tear-filled press conference after being nominated as the most valuable player in 1969 and winning the Super Bowl, Namath declared, "I'm not selling, I quit." However, about a month later, Namath met with Rozelle in the commissioner's plush 13th floor Park Avenue office and came to an agreement. So Namath sold the interest in the club and was allowed to join the team at the training camp. So after a month-long saga, his retirement was officially over, and to the joy of several of his fans. And who was it? Was it Joe Namath who also frequented, I think it was Pirates World that I discussed. I think it was Joe Namath. I think it was one of the major Dolphins football players there that played football toss. Like I said before, I was born in the wrong decade. And several of the lesser known clubs were one called the Flying Machine, and an entryway was made from an old seaplane. And legendary local bassist Jaco Pastorius played with gigs there between 1969 and 1970 when he was still a teenager. And the punk rock forefathers, New York Dolls, played cross-dressing gigs in 1974 that was bootlegged. That show was bootlegged and released, and that would be interesting to find. So that's really all I could find on the Flying Machine, is that it was unique, and it had the plane, the seaplane, and well-known bassists played there. And actually, Flying Machine was the name of a group in the 70s who had a one-hit wonder called "Smile a Little Smile for Me, Rosemary." Rosemary was a popular name back in the late 60s, early 1970. And Flying Machine was actually the first band, was James Taylor's first band. And if you noted in his song Fire and Rain, which was autobiographical, he says "sweet dreams and flying machines and pieces on the ground." So that's where he got that from his band. So that's few interesting facts. And one of the major places, and I've actually been there in the 80s for several hair metal bands. Oh God, I can just cringe. And two major acts, Robert Plant. Actually, Robert Plant and Ozzy were my two favorites. And it was, of course, called the Hollywood Sportatorium, which was opened, I think, around 1976. And it was the middle of the boonies. I mean, you had to go out, I think, all the way out west, all the way out in the boonies. And of course, there's several people outside gathered around, smoking, dropping acid, drinking, you name it, before, of course, they go into the building. And of course, once people were there, I mean, there was still pot smoke around. I mean, come on, beer served there. I mean, but when you're a teenager, you sneak all of that first before going in. So anyway, it was the rock mecca of South Florida. And though it booked several established acts, it wasn't without its flaws. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd and Billy Joel complained about the awful acoustics. And I remember when we were scheduled to go to the Robert Plant show in, when was it, 1985. It was May or June, I can't remember, 1985. And the show was delayed another day due to the awful rain, and it was coming in through the roof. And Robert Plant even commented, he says, "This is the first show I had to cancel due to water in the building." And Pink Floyd and the Grateful Dead were the top name bands that played there, and along with Led Zeppelin and Elvis in 1977 in his last tour before his well-known, now infamous death. And my mom even has a picture of him up on stage, and it was really cool. It was February of 1977, and the hair metal bands I went there. I remember my first concert. I went there in 16, which actually was a band they formed in the 70s, and I actually like a lot of their 70s stuff, and very early 80s was the Scorpions, and they're kind of sort of not really a hair metal band, but of course after Love at First Sting they just went south. And they used to be one of my favorites. I remember cranking up Love at First Sting on my stereo that I got in 1983. That was like the bomb. And crank it up. A friend of mine would be on, and we'd crank it up, and we'd be smoking in my room. Oh my God, those were the days. I mean, I had some fun as a teenager in the 80s, but nothing compared to the 70s. I was born, like I said, I was born too late. And anyway, the Hollywood Sportatorium, I'm not too sure when they closed. I know they were still active in the 80s, and I believe they closed in the 90s. But that was the place to go for concerts, and it had, like I said, several. I think I'm thinking of maybe it was around the early 70s. Maybe it was. You know what? I think it was the early 70s, not 1976. Duh. Because I think my ex's parents went there to see Led Zeppelin. I think it was in 1971. I think it was there. I'm not sure. The memory, it escapes me. But anyway, moving on. There were several other least well-known clubs. One of them, not too sure what this was called, but it was open in Fort Pierce, and it was called the Evil People Lounge. And who knows where they got up their name, but I guess given the tackiness of the decade, the people go to clubs, to pick people up, or bars, and so hence the term evil people. I mean, they're not, nice, good, Christian, middle American people that go there. So, I mean, that's obvious. Hello, Lee. I'm glad you can come on. I was just talking about Pete and Lenny's, Limelight, Bachelor's 3, and the Hollywood Sportatorium here in Florida. I can recap at the end. I know you can watch the playback, but to make it easier, I will recap for everyone. And the next club that I found was He and She, and it was open in West Palm Beach. And according to what I've read, it left very little to the imagination. And it was definitely a swingers and sex club, giving the bill of the advertisement. It had a woman kneeling at a man, her face was right near his crotch, kneeling by him. So yeah, you can picture, and you can just picture the aqua velva and the high karate, whatever that name, that fragrance was called for men, and of course the porn mustaches, the hairy chests, the medallions, the cuffs, and the leisure, the polyester leisure suits, and of course the women with their satin and the disco dresses, and the high platforms, and these kind of do's, and the heavy makeup. Yeah, it was a tacky area. And still, I can't see the appeal of John Travolta and those kind of, macho Italian kind of, no, it just turns me off. Sorry. Just turns me off. And anyway, actually, one of the artists that performed there in 1972 was Chubby Checker. And actually, in 1970, maybe, I'm not too sure, after his fame from the twist and the pony time and all that, he started to go more like a psychedelic rock and funk. He was leaning towards that, and he actually found some songs from 1970 that actually sounded pretty good, and he performed there. And he probably performed, I would think he performed a lot of that material. And sounds like you're having a fun day. Yeah, that's funny. You remind me. I remember, like I said, about over a year ago, I used to listen to your show with headphones, and I'd be around the house cleaning and doing things, and my hubby was getting, he goes, "Oh no, I wasn't getting annoyed." I'm like, "Yeah, the hell you weren't. Oh my God, you're still on." I mean, like he was annoyed. Come on. You can't pull the wool over my eyes. Believe me, I know that look and I know that tone. But anyway, the last one that last one that I found that I looked up was a place called Stan's, and it was rumored to be named after Stanley Laurel. And I think people got the mistake. They thought it was Oliver's, named after Oliver Hardy, but it was definitely Stan's, and I think Stan's sounds better. And it was situated on the Intercoastal off of Commercial Boulevard here in Fort Lauderdale. And it had a canal side patio. And I think I've been at that area quite a few times. And I bet you now over there is where, I don't know if it's Benihana's or is there now, but I have to check it out again. I'm thinking that's more than likely where it was. And the barmaids were short little white uniforms with flared skirts, and supposedly there's great Bloody Marys. Sorry, I tried one. It's disgusting. I know everybody else has a different opinion, but I'm boring. My main poison is Pinot Grigio, and every now and then a margarita. Maybe a mojito, but a lot of times I have to be careful because I get heartburn from sweet drinks because I'm not used to it, except for, like I said, I'm used to Pinot Grigio, but I have to be careful that I eat that kind of on a full stomach. I mean, drink on a full stomach, sorry. And they had a fine food. You can get there by boat, and there was also a lot of celebrities there. So, of course, like I said, the three major clubs, again, were Pete and Lenny's, which was where a TV program named Disco 77 was filmed there, and it got exposure to over 70 countries, being that it was there was very limited network channels. There's 3 and 1 public access channel, but it got major visibility. And Donna Summer performed there, Al Green, both of them were my favorites. And then Odyssey, which had that one-hit wonder called Native New Yorker, and then there was Tavares, who had Heaven Must Be Missing an Angel, and It Only Takes a Minute, which is one of my favorites. And they also did More Than a Woman, which Bee Gees did a superior version than them. And Vicky Sue Robinson of Turn the Beat Around fame also performed there. That was one of my favorite disco songs as well. And of course, there was Bachelors 3. It was owned by 3 bachelors: Bobby Van, who was a singer, Joe Namath, and John, or whatever his name, Ray Abruzzese, which was also a teammate of his. And it was another pickup joint, for singles, of course. And it was open in 1969. And actually, Joe Rozelle, who was the commissioner of the NFL at the time, wanted Joe to give up his cut. He wanted to have him divest the interest or face a suspension, because where there's a lot of performers and celebrities, there's due to be visits from the mafia. So, Joe gave a press conference saying, "That's it, I'm not selling, I quit." But he got together with Rozelle, and they reached an agreement, and Nathan Namath sold the interest in the club, and he was able to join the team at the training camp. And after a month, his retirement was basically over. So that was one of the main clubs, and the other one was Limelight. It had the stainless steel sunken disco dance floor and a multi-million-dollar light show and light and sound show, and it was always packed. And it set the standard for a lot of the other clubs. And this one was open in Hollandale, and unfortunately burned down in a fire. It got destroyed, and they just decided to open it in Atlanta, which was a shame. And of course, there's another one called, what was the other one? Evil People, which was a not very well-known bar. And there was also, not Bachelors 3, but there was the Flying Machine, which was the entrance was made out of a seaplane. And Jaco Pastorius, who was a well-known bassist that played there, played gigs in the 1969 and 1970 when he was a teenager. And the forefathers of punk, who were the New York Dolls, who were the cross-dressers of punk. They played some gigs there, and that was actually filmed there and bootlegged, and it was released. And Hollywood Sportatorium, I went over, where it's out in the boonies, and several main acts performed there. The Grateful Dead, Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. Elvis did his last tour there. My mom had a picture of him, and I went to several hair metal concerts there. Yeah, I after that, I still got into hair metal, but my focus was more back in the 70s, and thank God I moved on from hair metal. Thank God. And the He and She West Palm Beach Club I covered, the Swingers Club, Sex Club, left very little to the imagination, as it had been noted. And that was the most popular hotspots. And like I said, the one that Pete and Lenny's, one of the owners, Lenny Boyar, opened the club called Christopher's in 1977. Like I said, my mom went there and had some very, very colorful men that came up and asked her to dance. You'll have to catch the rest on my video, but I just went over and covered the pretty much the whole clubs, the whole stories that I managed to gather. And I got this wig all situated very well today. So I'm very happy to actually wear this and pose. And like I said, I wore this for many costumes, like 70s costumes. And why people ask, what are you supposed to be, just blew my mind. So I started dressing into costumes that everyone knows. So I guess, well, it's been said, sometimes when you're unique, people, just don't get it. But anyway, that's the talk of the Florida hotspots. And I'm going to have more videos. I will possibly do one tomorrow covering popular beauty products of the 70s. So that'll be another avenue that would aim towards women's fashions, and something most of the women can probably relate to nationally. And instead of focusing in on Florida, but even I do the Florida folklore and the Florida 70s culture here, as I grew up here. I also cover, of course, the basic 70s that everyone can relate to and have encountered. Okay, I will see you on my next show, and I will let you know when I go live. And everyone, have a fantastic day. Bye.